Alrighty folks, so regardless of whether you're using grow bags, an in-ground bed setup, or raised beds, today I'm going to take us through 3 amazing soil blends that are going to get you all kinds of garden goodies this season. And so as we get started here, if you have any questions at any point, go ahead and just leave those down in the comments. I start every one of my days by having a cup of coffee and answering every question that we get on YouTube. So go ahead and fire it down there and you'll get a response from me super quickly. So the first soil mix that we're going to go through is for containers and grow bags. And in this growing environment, we want a combination of compost for all the nutrients and microbial life, coco coir for a little bit of lightness, and perlite for some drainage. And so once we have those 3 inputs, we need to measure out the proper ratios for each of them. And so for grow bags and containers, we're first going to measure out 3 parts compost. And I'm utilizing a 5-gallon pail for this and just filling it up to the top. And once I've got those 3 filled up, I'm moving over to my coco coir. And for this, we're going to fill up 2 of the 5-gallon pails. And you could utilize peat moss or coco coir or pit moss if you're down in the US. And then lastly, we need 1 part perlite. And as you measure these out, do know that you could do this in smaller quantities, larger quantities. It's the ratios that are important. And so now with the ratios measured out, all that we need to do is mix them up. So I'm going to put down a tarp, but I've seen a lot of people utilize a little kiddie pool for this that's worked really well. And all that I'm doing is basically taking my shovel, going underneath, lifting up and turning it over. And then I just start going in a circle around the mix, lifting up, turning over, lifting up, turning over, lifting up, turning over. And I continue to do this until I have a nice uniform and consistent blend. And so as I run my hands through it here, I'm really happy with where we're at. And so all that's left to do now is fill up the grow bags or containers by simply shoveling it into each of them. And so at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to actually transplant into this mix that you've just put together. But before we do that, let's go through our next 2 soil mixes. So our second soil mix is for an in-ground bed. And so if you have a patch of dirt that doesn't have any grass or weeds in it, just like this area in my front yard, then it can be the perfect blank canvas for building an in-ground bed. But when we look at it, it's really, really heavy in sand and silt and clay, and there's definitely no organic matter in there or any microbial life, both of which our plants want. So if I went to plant in there right now, it would not go very well. Now, if we just put compost on top of this, we would be creating 2 very distinct layers where we've got our sand, silt, and clay, and then sitting on top of it, all of that organic matter. And that would also be a really challenging environment for our plants to be growing in. So what we actually want to be doing in this instance and this instance only is rototilling it into the bed. And so to do this, the first thing that I'm going to do is bring a significant amount of compost over to this bed. And then I'm just going to go ahead and kind of evenly spread it throughout the area that I want to be growing in. And then with my rototiller, I'm just going to start working through it. And I'm trying to get down as deep as possible to create as consistent of a blend as I can. So don't be afraid to get down 3, 4, 5 inches on that, because that's going to ultimately give you a better foundation in the years to come. And so after putting down those first 5 wheelbarrows of compost, I can still see a pretty significant of sand and silt and clay, and I'm not afraid to growing in a lot of compost. I've done 100% compost in some beds before. So what I'm actually going to do is add another round of compost in here just by bringing over wheelbarrows and putting it down directly on top, and then grabbing my rototiller and coming back through it to work all of that in once again as deep as possible so I can get that really beautiful consistent mixture to serve as my soil foundation. And then the last piece that I want to do here is just put some rocks in place to kind of contour and shape the bed while also allowing it all to stay in place. All right, and so just before we get to our third recipe here, for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more joy, more restoration in your life, then I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here, because we put out new videos just like this one to be taking all of the guesswork out of gardening so that you can be experiencing gardening's mental health benefits more quickly. So on to our third and final soil mix, and this is for raised bed environments. And this is where we can absolutely go with that Charles Dowding no dig, no till, 100% compost approach. And so in this particular instance, once you have your raised bed in place and are all set to fill it, all that you need to be doing is adding 100% compost into these beds. Now, you might be wondering which compost should I be going with? And so if you're doing a smaller space and going by the bag, a really good option is sea soil. It's got a beautiful texture to it, great particle size, and is going to perform really well for you. But if you're needing to fill multiple beds, then you're going to want to order it by the yard. And so from your local nursery or soil depot, all that you need to do is ask them for their 100% organic compost amender. Don't go for any of their soil blends, because usually that just means that they've added a bunch of sand into it. Get the 100% organic compost amender, and then you can make any tweaks to it that you feel like. Speaking of, one variation that I really like to do off of this is actually to go 75% compost, 25% vermiculite. What I find is that some composts can be a little bit hydrophobic, which means that they actually repel water. And with the vermiculite, once I've blended that in there, it creates this really beautiful consistency and allows for some water retention in it as well. And this is the slight variation that I'm using in most of the beds that I'm establishing these days. And so now, once you've put that compost down, we want to disturb this soil as little as possible. Because with all that compost that we have added into the beds, there's tons of nutrients and microbial life that are living in and amongst there. And so if you're curious to learn more about this really fascinating soil ecosystem that lives beneath the surface, I really encourage you to check out the book Teaming with Microbes, either as an audiobook or an actual hard copy version. But it's really fascinating how it goes through each of the different pieces and how it's all interconnected in that ecosystem. So now that we have either our container established for you, or an in-ground bed, or a raised bed, the last thing that we need to do is transplant our babies into it. And the beauty of this is that it is the exact same regardless of which scenario you might find yourself in. And so all that we need to do is dig down to create a little bit of a transplant hole here. This is going to vary depending on how large and mature your plant is. Next, I'm going to grab one handful of worm castings and sprinkle that throughout the hole. And then I'm also going to add in 1 tablespoon of an organic fertilizer, such as our 444 superfood. And then we'll just gently massage that into that area. Once that's done, I'm now grabbing my plant baby, popping it out of the seed cell that it has been living in, and putting it into this transplant hole. And then we just backfill with the surrounding soil that we just pulled out and gently compact it in there so it's nice and snug. And then we top dress with 1 additional handful of worm castings and 1 tablespoon of 444 superfood. So we sprinkle that around the stem where it enters into the soil, and then we just gently massage that into the top 1 inch of the soil. And the last thing that we want to do is just give it a nice big drink of water here. And folks, that's all there is to it. So it's that simple to be establishing a really amazing soil mix for either a container or an in-ground bed or a raised bed environment. And I absolutely know that if you utilize any of those approaches, you're going to have amazing success this season. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down in the comments here. Otherwise, that's all for right now. I can't wait to catch you on the next video. Until then, go get your hands dirty.